Unregistered, unidentified, something was approaching. The capital, then they realized it was human. The alert came at the middle of the night cycle, when most of the capital was asleep. Deep in the lower levels of the Skywatch Tower, on the planet Calyx Prime, a young sensor operator named Yenny Sol was running her usual checks. She worked the night shift because it was quiet. Nothing ever happened at night. The Dominion had ruled this part of space for over 1,000 years, and no enemy fleet had ever come close to the capital. The border fleet stopped anything dangerous long before it reached this deep into Dominion territory. Yenny liked the quiet. She could drink her tea, watch the star charts slowly turn, and think about nothing at all. That night, something broke the quiet. A small red light blinked on her console. Then it blinked again, faster. Yenny frowned and leaned forward. The light meant a new object had entered the outer sensor field, far beyond the 9th patrol ring. That alone was not strange. Comets, small rocks, and dead satellites drifted through that space all the time. The system was built to ignore most of it. But this light did not turn off. Yenny tapped the screen and pulled up the object's data. Speed, extremely high, faster than any known comet. Size, small, about the size of a single-pilot fighter craft. Shape, unclear. Origin, unknown. Registration, none. She sat up straighter. Every ship that flew through Dominion space needed a registration code. Traders had one. Miners had one. Even pirates, when they were foolish enough to be caught, had a code stolen from someone else. This object had no code at all. It was not answering any signal. It was not slowing down. Yenny checked the system twice, thinking her equipment was broken. It was not broken. The object was real, and it was moving in a straight line, directly toward Calyx Prime. She called her supervisor. Supervisor Torv Enoch was an older Thrinny male, with tired eyes, and 4 decades of night shifts behind him. He did not like being woken up, but when he saw the numbers on Yenny's screen, his tiredness disappeared. "Run it again," he said. Yenny ran it again. Same result. Unregistered, unidentified, high speed, heading straight for the capital. "This has to be a mistake," Torv said, but his voice did not sound sure. "I checked 3 times," Yenny said. "It is not slowing down. It passed the 9th ring 20 minutes ago. At this speed, it will reach the 7th ring within the hour." Torv stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he pressed the alarm. Word moved fast after that. Within 10 minutes, senior officers were called from their beds. Within 20 minutes, the Planetary Defense Council was informed. Within 30 minutes, General Vasco Rune, commander of the Calyx Prime Defense Fleet, was standing in the command center, still wearing half of his uniform, staring at the same red light that Yenny Sol had first seen. General Orun was a large Threnny, broad across the shoulders, with pale gray skin and sharp black eyes. He had served in the fleet for 30 years, and had seen many strange things at the borders of Dominion space. But he had never seen anything move this fast without leaving a clear trail of engine exhaust that the sensors could read. "What is it?" he asked. "We don't know," said Torv. "It has no registration, no signal response, no matching profile in any database. It is not a comet. It is not a known ship class. It is moving with control, not by gravity or chance." "Then it is being flown," Orun said. "That is what the pattern suggests, sir." Orun looked at the star map, where a small blinking dot crawled slowly across the screen, closer and closer to the center where the capital sat. "Send a border patrol to intercept and identify. Standard procedure. No weapons fire unless fired upon." The order went out. 2 patrol ships from the 7th ring were sent to meet the object and force it to stop or turn away. It was a routine order, the kind given 100 times a year for lost freighters or confused travelers who had wandered off their trade routes. This was not routine. The 2 patrol ships reached the object within minutes. Their pilots opened a channel and repeated the standard warning in every common language of the Dominion. "Identify yourself. You are entering restricted space. Reduce speed and prepare to be boarded." There was no answer. The object did not slow down. It did not change course. The patrol ships moved to block its path, forming a wall in front of it, the way they always did with confused or stubborn travelers. The object went straight through the gap between them, without even trying to avoid a collision. The patrol pilots later said, when questioned, that it felt like watching something ignore them completely, as if their two large ships were nothing more than dust in the way. "It passed through our formation," the lead pilot reported, his voice shaking slightly. "It did not fire. It did not communicate. It is simply going somewhere." Back in the command center, General Orun's jaw tightened. "Send 4 more ships. This time, use warning shots across its path." The order was carried out. 4 fighters moved into position ahead of the object and fired bright beams of light across its nose, a standard signal meaning stop now or be fired upon directly. It was meant to frighten. It always worked. No sane pilot ignored a warning shot from 4 armed fighters. The object did not stop. It adjusted its path slightly, a small, smooth turn, avoiding the beams by only a narrow distance, and continued on exactly the same heading as before, straight toward Calyx Prime. "It read our shots and calculated the safest path around them," said the sensor officer watching the feed. "That is not something an unmanned object does. That is a decision. Someone is flying that thing, and they are very, very good." General Orun felt something cold move through his chest, a feeling he had not felt in many years. He had commanded fleets during small border conflicts. He knew what fear looked like on the faces of young officers. He was starting to see it now, all around the command center. "Counselor Amarin needs to be told," he said, now. Counselor Thess Amarin was the head of the ruling council of the Dominion, the highest civilian authority on Calyx Prime. She was smaller than most Threnni, with silver-gray feathers along her neck that were a mark of old age and long wisdom. She had led the council for 11 years and had guided the Dominion through droughts, trade disputes, and one small war with a neighboring system. She had never been woken in the middle of the night for a single unidentified object. When she arrived at the command center, still wrapped in her sleeping robe, she found the room full of officers speaking over each other, all staring at the same blinking light on the largest screen. "Report," she said, and the room went quiet. General Orun explained everything: the first detection, the failed intercept, the ignored warning shots, the strange, controlled path the object was taking directly toward the capital. "What is your assessment?" Amarin asked. "I do not have one yet," Orun admitted. "It is too fast for a shuttle, too small for a warship, and it does not fight when threatened. It simply avoids and continues. I have never seen anything behave this way. Could it be a weapon? An unmanned missile of some kind?" "Missiles do not calculate the safest path around warning shots, Counselor. Missiles fly in straight lines and explode. This is choosing its path with skill. I believe there is a pilot inside it, and that pilot is either very brave or does not believe we can stop them." Amarin's feathers flattened slightly, a sign of unease among her kind. "How long until it reaches the capital?" Torv checked his numbers. "At its current speed, if it does not slow down, it will reach the 6th ring within the hour, and the inner defense zone shortly after that." "Then we do not have time to wonder," Amarin said. "General, prepare a full response. I want every ship in the inner fleet ready. I want the planetary shield grid brought to full power, and I want to know who is flying that thing before it reaches my city." Orun gave the orders immediately. Across the capital, alarms began to sound in military bases. Pilots were pulled from their beds and rushed to their ships. The Great Planetary Shield, a network of energy stations built around Calyx Prime centuries ago and rarely used at full strength, began to hum to life, drawing enormous amounts of power from the planet's core reactors. While the soldiers prepared for battle, another kind of search began in the quiet halls of the Central Archive, the great library that held the recorded history of the Dominion and everything it had ever encountered among the stars. Counselor Amarin had sent a private message to the chief archivist, a scholar named Doran Vell, asking him to search for any record, any old report, any forgotten file that might explain what kind of ship or being could fly this way. Doran Vell was not a young man. He had spent nearly 50 years studying the old records of the Dominion, going back thousands of years to the earliest days of Threnni space travel. He knew more about strange and forgotten things than almost anyone alive. When the message came in, asking him to search urgently, in the middle of the night, for anything about an unidentified, unregistered, unstoppable object, something old and buried in his memory, stirred. He remembered, many years ago, as a young student, reading a sealed file in the deepest part of the archive. A file about a species that had once, long before the Dominion existed in its current form, been marked with a warning so severe that all records about them had been locked away and mostly forgotten. He could not remember the details. He only remembered the feeling the file had given him, a chill, a sense that whoever wrote it had been genuinely afraid. He began his search, moving through the old, dusty data vaults, searching for anything connected to unregistered, unstoppable, single-pilot craft. It would take him hours to find what he was looking for. By then, much would have already happened above the capital. Back at the command center, the object had crossed the sixth ring. The inner fleet, nearly 200 ships strong, had formed a wide defensive line between the object and the capital. It was the largest gathering of Dominion warships seen above Calyx Prime in over a century. Every ship carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. 200 ships against one small, unidentified craft seemed, to most of the pilots waiting in the dark, like an unnecessary show of force. Many of them quietly believed this would be over in minutes, that whatever foolish traveler or malfunctioning drone was approaching would be destroyed or captured with barely any effort. General Arun did not share their confidence. He had watched the object dodge warning shots with perfect calculation. He had watched it pass through a formation of 2 ships without hesitation. He gave the order for the fleet to open fire the moment the object crossed the 5th ring, without further warning. He did not want to take any more chances. The object crossed the 5th ring exactly on schedule. 200 ships opened fire at once. The sky above Calyx Prime lit up with a storm of energy beams. More firepower released in a single moment than had been fired in the last war combined. For a few seconds, the object vanished completely inside the blinding light of the attack. Every officer in the command center held their breath, waiting for the report that the target had been destroyed. The report never came. When the light faded, the object was still there, still moving, still on the exact same path toward the capital. It had not been hit. Every beam had missed, not by luck, but because the object had shifted its position again and again, weaving through gaps in the firing pattern with a precision that should not have been possible for anything that small and that fast. Status, Arun barked. No hits confirmed, came the shaking reply. Sir, it dodged everything. All 200 ships, it dodged everything. A heavy silence fell over the command center. Counselor Amarin, still standing near the great screen, felt her chest tighten. She had led her people through difficult times, but she had never felt this particular kind of fear before. The fear of something she could not understand, and could not stop. Fire again, Arun ordered, his voice tighter now. All ships, continuous fire. Do not let it find a pattern to predict. The fleet obeyed. Wave after wave of energy beams filled the space above the capital. The object kept moving, kept dodging, kept advancing, closer and closer toward the 4th ring, then the 3rd. It was not attacking. That was the strangest part. It had 200 warships firing everything they had at it, and it had not fired back once. It was not trying to destroy the fleet. It was only trying to get past it, the way a person might try to walk through a crowded room without stopping to fight anyone who bumped into them. It's not fighting us, said Yenny Sol quietly, watching from her console. It's just trying to get somewhere. It's going around us, not through us. General Arun heard her and turned. Then where is it trying to go? Nobody had an answer. Not yet. The object crossed the 3rd ring, then the 2nd. The great planetary shield, humming at full power, stood as the final wall between the object and the capital city below. It had never been tested against a real threat before. It had only ever been used in drills and simulations. Now, for the first time in a century, it would be tested for real. The object slowed slightly as it approached the shield, the first time it had changed its speed since it was first detected. For a moment, everyone in the command center dared to hope that it had finally given up, that it would turn away now that it faced a barrier it could not simply dodge around. Then the object's outer surface began to glow with a soft golden light, and it moved forward again, straight toward the shield, faster than before. "Brace for impact," Orun said quietly, and the whole command center went still, waiting to see what would happen when the unstoppable met the unbreakable. Far above the capital, in the dark cold of space, the small golden light grew brighter as it raced toward the shining wall of the planetary shield, and no one on Calyx Prime yet knew who or what was inside it, or why it had traveled so far, alone, against so many, to reach the heart of the Dominion. But they were about to find out. The golden light hit the planetary shield with a sound like a bell being struck by a mountain. The entire shield flared bright white, and for a moment, every screen in the command center went blind with static. Alarms screamed. Power readings across the capital spiked so high that lights flickered in cities hundreds of miles from the impact point. General Orun gripped the edge of his console, waiting for the feed to clear, waiting to hear that the object had finally been stopped. When the static cleared, the shield was still standing, but it was not whole. A section of it, roughly the size of a small moon, had turned dark, its energy drained completely, and on the other side of that dark patch, still glowing faintly gold, still moving, the object continued forward, now well inside the first ring, closer to the capital than anything unregistered had ever been in the history of the Dominion. "Shield status," Orun demanded. "Section 7 is down," came the reply. "It absorbed the impact and burned out completely. The rest of the grid is holding, but power is dropping across the whole network. Whatever hit that shield, it didn't just fly through it. It drank it." "Drank it," Counselor Amarin repeated, stepping closer to the screen. "The object's energy signature spiked the instant before impact," the officer explained, his voice unsteady, as if it pulled power directly from the shield into itself. Then it kept moving, using that power to fly even faster. Orun stared at the small, golden dot still crawling across the map. It was smaller than a shuttle. It had absorbed the strongest defense the Dominion had built in 100 years, and it had used that very defense to move even faster toward the capital. "Get me every fighter squadron still in range," Orun said, "and someone find out where that thing is actually going. It has ignored the fleet, dodged our fire, and drank our shield. It is not attacking anything. It is heading somewhere specific. I want to know where." A young tactical officer named Fessa Bren, barely 2 years out of training, pulled up a projection of the object's path, extending the line forward from its current position through the capital city below. She traced it once, then traced it again, her hands trembling slightly. "Sir," she said, "its path leads directly to the Ashgrove facility." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence had a different weight to it. The Ashgrove facility was not a well-known place. It did not appear on public maps. It was a secure holding site on the northern edge of the capital, run jointly by Dominion intelligence and the military, used to contain prisoners considered too dangerous, too valuable, or too strange for ordinary detention. Very few people in the entire government knew what was actually kept there. General Orun was one of the few who did, and when he heard the name, his blood went cold. "That cannot be a coincidence," Amarin said quietly, watching Orun's face carefully. She had noticed his reaction. "General, is there something about that facility I should know?" Orun hesitated. Military secrets were not shared lightly, even with the head of the ruling council. But this was no longer a night for secrets. 14 years ago, he said slowly, a Dominion patrol intercepted a small exploration vessel at the edge of our territory, far beyond the outer rings. The vessel was not one of ours, not one from any species we traded with. It was crewed by beings we had never encountered before. Small, soft-skinned, 2 arms, 2 legs, no natural armor, no claws, nothing that should have made them dangerous. "What happened to them?" Amarin asked. Most of the crew surrendered without a fight. They were unarmed, confused, clearly lost. Standard procedure was followed. They were brought in, questioned, and eventually classified for long-term containment, while the council decided what to do with them. That decision was never made. The matter was quietly buried, and the prisoners have remained at Ashgrove ever since. 14 years, Amarin repeated, and no one thought to inform the council that we were holding an unknown species in secret containment this entire time. It was classified above council level at the time, Orun said, handled directly by the previous intelligence director. I only know because I approved the initial transport. And the crew, Amarin pressed. How many were there? Oren thought back, trying to remember details from a report he had read only once, many years ago. 7, I believe. 7 prisoners. 1 additional crew member was never found. The report noted that a single escape pod had launched from the vessel during the intercept and was never recovered. It was assumed lost, destroyed, or drifted into deep space where it could not survive. Everyone in the room slowly turned to look at the golden dot still moving across the star map, now well past the first ring, descending steadily toward the northern edge of the capital, toward a facility that held 7 prisoners of an unknown species that no one outside a small circle had known existed. You think that missing crew member survived, Amarin said. It was not really a question. I think, Orun said carefully, that whatever is inside that object has spent 14 years finding a way back here, and I think it has finally arrived. Far across the capital, deep in the quiet stone halls of the Central Archive, Doran Vell was still searching. He had been at it for hours, moving through sealed vaults that had not been opened in decades, following a memory so old he was not even sure he trusted it anymore. He searched under every heading he could think of: unidentified species, unregistered vessels, unknown threats, ancient quarantines. Most of what he found was useless: old records of pirates and smugglers and long-dead border disputes. Then, buried inside a file marked only with a number and no name, he found something. It was old, far older than the Dominion itself, dating back to a time before the current government had even formed, back when the ancestors of the Threnny people were still divided into competing empires that fought each other more often than they explored the stars. The file described a species, encountered only once, very briefly, during a great war between 2 of those old empires. The species was small, physically weak by every measurement the ancient scholars had used, lacking natural weapons, thick skin, or any of the traits that usually marked a dangerous being. And yet the file described, in careful, frightened language, how a handful of these beings, stranded and outnumbered on a battlefield that was not even their own, had refused to surrender. They had fought for 6 days against overwhelming numbers, using nothing but scavenged weapons and whatever materials they could find, and had inflicted losses on both warring empires that neither had expected. When the battle finally ended, only 2 of the beings remained alive, and both empires, exhausted and disturbed by what they had witnessed, agreed on something rare: to never seek out that species again, and to erase most records of the encounter, keeping only a warning buried deep in the oldest archives, for any future government wise enough to search for it. The species was called, in the old records, simply humans. Doran Vell read the file 3 times, his hands shaking slightly by the 3rd reading. He remembered now why the memory of this file had stayed with him for 50 years. It was not the details of the battle that had frightened him as a young student. It was a single line near the end of the report, written by an ancient scholar whose name had long been lost to time. The line read, "They do not fight to win. They fight because stopping is not something they know how to do. Do not corner them. Do not threaten what they love. And whatever you do not hold them prisoner and expect them to simply wait." Doran Vell picked up the archive's emergency communicator with trembling hands and called the command center directly, breaking every protocol about proper channels and formal reports. He did not care. Someone needed to hear this immediately. "This is Chief Archivist Doran Vell," he said, his voice tight. "I need to speak to General Orun or Counselor Amarin right now. I believe I know what is approaching the capital, and I believe I know exactly why." The message reached the command center within minutes, and Doran Vell was patched through directly to the main screen, his tired, elderly face now filling half the display, standing beside the golden dot that continued its steady advance toward Ashgrove. "Say it plainly," Amarin said. "We do not have time for careful words." "The object is not a weapon, and it is not a machine acting alone," Doran said. "Based on what little history we have, I believe it is being piloted by a member of a species called humans. There is an old record, buried and mostly forgotten, describing an encounter with this species many centuries ago. They are physically unremarkable. They do not have claws, armor, or natural weapons, but the record describes them as extraordinarily difficult to stop once they have decided to do something. It describes small numbers of them, fighting far larger numbers, and causing devastating losses before finally being overcome. You are telling me one single unarmed being punched through our fleet and drank our shield because of stubbornness? Orun asked, disbelief clear in his voice. I am telling you what the old records say, Doran replied. And General, if what you told the counselor is true, if there are human prisoners being held at Ashgrove, and if one of their own has spent 14 years finding a way back to free them, then I do not believe stubbornness is the right word. I believe the correct word is loyalty. And based on this record, loyalty may be an even more dangerous thing to stand between. Counselor Amarin stared at the golden dot on the screen, now crossing the boundary of the capital city itself, weaving between tall towers and busy sky lanes where ordinary citizens, unaware of the crisis above them, were only just beginning to wake up and notice the strange lights in the sky and the distant sounds of alarms. General, she said slowly, how much resistance stands between that object and Ashgrove facility? 2 more defense rings, 1 squadron of city guard fighters, and the facility's own perimeter defenses, Orun answered. After what we have already seen, I do not know how much of that will actually slow it down. Then get every non-military life out of its path, Amarin said. I do not want a single citizen caught between our fleet and whatever that is. And General, I want you to consider something carefully before you give your next order. We have thrown everything we have at this human, and it has not fired back once. It has broken through our strongest defenses without killing anyone. What if the fight we are about to have is a fight we chose and did not need to have at all? Orun looked at her, then back at the screen, watching the small golden light descend lower into the city, moving with a terrible, quiet purpose that no weapon had yet managed to stop. With respect, Counselor, he said quietly, I do not think it matters anymore whether we choose this fight or not. I think that human already decided 14 years ago that this fight was coming. All we can choose now is how we meet it. The golden light crossed into the airspace above the northern district, moving directly toward the tall gray walls of Ashgrove facility, where deep inside, in a cell that had not seen sunlight in 14 years, 7 prisoners who had long since given up hope of ever going home, suddenly felt the walls around them begin to shake. Inside Ashgrove facility, the shaking grew stronger, and the 7 prisoners in the lower holding block pressed themselves against the corners of their cells, unsure whether to be afraid or hopeful. They had been prisoners for 14 years. In that time, they had grown used to the gray walls, the same food twice a day, the guards who spoke to them only in short, cold commands. They had grown used to believing that no one was coming for them, that the crew member who escaped in the pod that night had either died in the vacuum of space or given up and disappeared into some quiet corner of the galaxy, choosing survival over the impossible task of rescue. An older man named Marcus Webb, the former captain of the lost exploration vessel, sat up straighter as the shaking continued. He had aged badly in captivity, his hair gone fully gray, his frame thin from years of poor food and no sunlight. But his eyes, when he looked toward the ceiling, still held something sharp and alert. That's not an earthquake, he said quietly to the woman in the next cell. Her name was Priya Anand, once the ship's engineer, now simply another prisoner, marked with a number instead of a name by the guards who fed her twice a day. How can you tell? Earthquakes don't get louder in a pattern, Marcus said. That's an explosion, a lot of them, getting closer. Down the hall, the youngest of the prisoners, a man named Danny Cho, who had been barely 22 years old when he was captured, now 36, pressed his hands against the cold wall of his cell and closed his eyes. He had spent years telling himself not to hope, because hope in a place like this only made the days harder. But something about the rhythm of the shaking, steady, deliberate, growing closer with each passing minute, made his chest tighten with a feeling he had almost forgotten how to recognize. It's her, he whispered. It has to be her. Above the facility, in the dark sky over the capital, the golden light that had once been small and distant was now close enough that ordinary citizens on the ground could see it clearly. A bright shape weaving through the last squadron of city guard fighters sent to intercept it. The guard pilots, less experienced than the border fleet, less prepared for what they were facing, fired everything they had. The golden shape moved through their formation the way it had moved through everything else that night, avoiding each shot by margins so narrow that several pilots later swore, in their reports, that it must have been reading their minds. It still did not fire back. General Arun watched from the command center as squadron after squadron fell behind, unable to slow the object down, unable to land a single hit. He had commanded fleets for 30 years, and in that time he had never once felt as helpless as he did now, watching something so small make his entire defense network look like a training exercise for children. "Sir," Fessa Bren said from her console, her voice tight. "Ashgrove's perimeter shield is up, but at this rate it will make contact within 4 minutes. Get Director Halden on the line," Arun said. Halden was the current head of Ashgrove facility, the person responsible for its prisoners and its defenses. "I want to know what protections that facility actually has, beyond the perimeter shield." Director Halden appeared on screen moments later, a nervous, thin-faced Threnny official who clearly had never expected his quiet, secret posting to become the center of a planetary crisis. "General, we have standard containment measures, but nothing built to withstand what I am seeing on these reports. Ashgrove was designed to keep prisoners in, not to stop an armed attack." "It is not armed," Arun said. "Not with weapons we can measure, at least. It has not fired a single shot this entire approach. Director, I need you to consider something. What if it is not attacking your facility? What if it is trying to reach the prisoners inside it?" Halden's face went pale. "The human prisoners." "Yes. General, if that thing reaches the lower holding block, our guards are under standing orders to treat any escape attempt as a lethal threat. If the prisoners try to move, if there is any sign of coordinated action inside the block during an external attack, protocol requires—" "I know what protocol requires," Arun said sharply. "Rescind it, immediately. Whatever that pilot is capable of doing to our fleet, I do not want to find out what happens if your guards give it a reason to stop holding back." Halden hesitated only a moment before nodding and issuing the order through his own channels. Deep inside Ashgrove, confused guards received new instructions. No lethal force against the prisoners under any circumstances. Full withdrawal from the lower holding block until further notice. Most of them were relieved. None of them had joined the guard service expecting to shoot unarmed captives, and the tension of the last 14 years had worn on everyone stationed there. Above the facility, the golden light reached the perimeter shield. This time there was no long buildup, no glowing surface, no dramatic pause. The object simply struck the shield at full speed, and the shield, far weaker than the planetary grid it had already drained once that night, shattered like glass. The golden shape did not slow down at all. It continued straight through the broken shield and down toward the facility's central courtyard, finally, after everything, beginning to slow as it approached the ground. For the first time since it had been detected, the object stopped moving entirely, hovering just above the courtyard stones, its golden glow beginning to fade, revealing, at last, what it actually was. It was a small ship, barely large enough for a single pilot, its hull a strange mix of designs that no one in the command center recognized, patched together from pieces that looked decades old and pieces that looked freshly built, welded and bolted in ways that suggested someone had built and rebuilt this vessel many times over many years, using whatever materials they could scavenge from wherever they had been stranded. The cockpit hissed open. Every camera in the facility turned toward it. Every soldier still standing nearby raised their weapon, then hesitated, remembering the new orders, unsure whether to fire or simply watch. A figure climbed out of the ship slowly, moving with the stiff care of someone who had been sitting in a small cockpit for a very long time. She was small compared to the Threnny soldiers around her, unarmored except for a simple flight suit that had clearly been patched and repaired more times than could be counted. Her hair was cropped short and rough, as if cut with a blade rather than proper tools. Her face was thin and weathered, but her eyes, when she looked up at the soldiers surrounding her, were calm in a way that unsettled every single one of them far more than any weapon could have. She raised both empty hands slowly, showing she carried nothing. "My name is Alex Reyes," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard in the common trade language, the same language taught to every child in the Dominion for use in dealing with outsiders. 14 years ago, 7 people were taken from a ship I served on. I want them back. I have not come here to hurt anyone who does not try to stop me from getting them." For a long moment no one moved. The soldiers stood frozen, weapons half raised, waiting for orders that no one seemed ready to give. Director Halden, watching from a secure office above the courtyard, felt his hands shaking as he stared down at the small figure who had just destroyed his facility's shield without breaking a sweat. "General," he said into his communicator, his voice barely steady, "she is standing in my courtyard. She is unarmed. She says she wants the prisoners. What are my orders?" In the command center, General Orun stared at the feed, at the small, tired figure standing calmly among dozens of armed soldiers who had just watched her tear through an entire planetary defense network without firing a single shot in return. He thought of the old archive file Doran Vell had described, the warning written by scholars who had lived and died thousands of years before he was born. Do not corner them. Do not threaten what they love. He thought of 14 years of secrecy, of 7 prisoners locked away and forgotten by everyone except the one person who refused to forget them. "Counselor," Orun said quietly, turning to Amarin, "what are your orders?" Amarin stood very still, watching the screen, watching the small woman standing so calmly in the center of so much military power, having already proven, beyond any doubt, that stopping her by force was simply not something the Dominion was capable of doing. "Tell Director Halden to stand his soldiers down," Amarin said finally. "No one fires, no one moves against her. And send word to the courtyard that the ruling council wishes to speak with her directly, in person, without weapons between us." Orun hesitated. "Counselor, with respect, is that wise? We do not know what she is capable of. We do not know what she wants beyond the prisoners." "General," Amarin said, her voice tired but steady, "we have spent the entire night trying to stop her with everything we have, and she has not harmed a single one of our people. I think it is past time we tried asking her what she wants, instead of only trying to stop her from getting it." The order went out. Across the courtyard, soldiers slowly lowered their weapons, watching the small woman who stood among them, waiting patiently, her eyes fixed on the gray walls of the facility, where, somewhere deep inside, 7 people she had spent 14 years trying to reach were now pressing their faces against cell doors, straining to hear whatever was happening beyond the walls that had kept them apart for so long. Counselor Amarin arrived at Ashgrove facility just after dawn, escorted by a small guard of soldiers who had been ordered, very clearly, to keep their weapons lowered no matter what happened. The sun was rising over the capital, turning the gray walls of the facility a soft orange, and the courtyard where Alex Reyes still stood looked almost peaceful now, as if the chaos of the night before had never happened. Alex had not moved far from her ship. She sat now on a low wall near the courtyard's edge, watching the soldiers around her with quiet, careful eyes, the kind of watchfulness that came from many years of never fully trusting a room to be safe. When Amarin approached, Alex stood up slowly, her body stiff, but her expression calm. "You are the one in charge," Alex said. It was not a question. "I am Counselor Thess Amarin, head of the ruling council of the Dominion," Amarin said. "You have caused a great deal of alarm tonight." "I know," Alex said. "I'm sorry for that. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I only wanted to get here. You destroyed a planetary shield section, broke through an entire defense fleet, and shattered a secure facility's perimeter," Amarin said. "Most beings who cause that much damage would not open with an apology." Alex's jaw tightened slightly. Most beings haven't spent 14 years watching their crew disappear into a place like this, and not knowing if they were even still alive. "I didn't come here to fight your people, Counselor. I came here because I made a promise, a long time ago, and I don't break promises." Amarin studied her carefully. There was no anger in the woman's voice, no threat, only a tired, steady certainty that seemed to run deeper than any emotion Amarin had encountered in a very long time. "Tell me what happened to you," she said. "From the beginning. I would like to understand." Alex was quiet for a moment, looking past the counselor toward the gray walls of the facility. Then she began to speak. 14 years ago, our ship, the Meridian, was on a survey mission, mapping star systems no one from Earth had charted before. We weren't looking for trouble. We weren't armed for a fight. When your patrol intercepted us, our captain gave the order to stand down immediately. He didn't want anyone getting hurt over a misunderstanding. I was the youngest crew member on board, barely more than a kid, working as a systems technician. When the boarding began, our chief engineer grabbed me and shoved me into the emergency escape pod before I even understood what was happening. She said someone needed to get away, to tell people what happened to us. Then she went back to stand with the others. Amarin said nothing, listening. The pod launched right before your soldiers reached the bridge, Alex continued. I watched the Meridian get taken through the pod's rear camera until I lost the signal. I didn't know if anyone survived. I didn't know if I'd ever find out. I drifted for weeks before I found a dead moon with enough resources to keep me alive. I built a shelter. I found old wreckage, some of it from ships that had crashed there long before I arrived, and I started learning how to build things I had no business knowing how to build. I had a lot of time, and nothing else to do but figure out how to come back. 14 years, Amarin repeated softly. You spent 14 years alone, building that ship. I spent 14 years alone building 6 ships, Alex said. The first one barely got me off that moon before it fell apart. Each one after that was a little better, a little faster, a little smarter, because I kept finding wreckage from your people, from traders, from anyone who'd ever passed through that region and lost a ship. I studied everything I found. I took what worked and threw away what didn't. By the time I built the ship I flew in on tonight, I finally believed it might actually get me here, and get me back out again, with my crew. And if we had refused to release them, Amarin asked quietly, if we had chosen to fight rather than talk. For the first time, something colder passed behind Alex's tired eyes. Then I would have kept trying, until either I got them out, or I couldn't try anymore. That's not a threat, counselor. It's just what's true. I didn't spend 14 years alone building ships out of scrap metal, because I thought I might give up halfway through a fight. Amarin was silent for a long moment, thinking of the old archive file Doran Vell had found, the warning written by scholars from 1,000 years before she was born. They do not fight to win. They fight because stopping is not something they know how to do. She understood now, standing in front of this small, tired, unarmed woman, exactly what that warning had meant. Walk with me, Amarin said finally. They walked together across the courtyard toward the entrance of the lower holding block, soldiers parting silently to let them pass. General Orun met them at the doorway, his expression unreadable, watching Alex closely as she approached. Counselor, he said carefully, before we proceed, I must raise a concern. We know almost nothing about this species beyond what she has told us, and a single ancient record. Releasing 7 unknown prisoners on her word alone, without further verification. General, Amarin interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. She flew through everything we had to stop her, without harming a single soldier, to reach 7 people she has not seen in 14 years. I do not believe verification is the issue here. I believe the issue is that we have been holding innocent, unarmed prisoners in secret for 14 years, without ever properly deciding what to do with them, and it took this to finally force us to face that mistake. Orun's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. He knew, deep down, that Amarin was right, even if it was hard to admit, after everything his fleet had just failed to stop. Director Halden, waiting nervously nearby with a set of access keys in his trembling hands, stepped forward. Counselor, the order to release the prisoners. I need it confirmed directly, on record. You have it, Amarin said. Open the block. Halden nodded and moved to the heavy security door, inputting the release codes with shaking fingers. Alex stood close behind him, her whole body tense now in a way it had not been during the entire battle above the capital, as if fighting an entire fleet had been easier for her than waiting these last few seconds. The door slid open with a low mechanical groan, revealing a long gray hallway lined with cell doors, each one beginning to unlock as the block systems registered the new release order. One by one, the doors slid open, and one by one, tired, thin, blinking figures stepped out into the hallway light for the first time in 14 years. Marcus Webb came first, older and grayer than Alex remembered, but standing tall despite everything. Behind him came Priya Anand, then the others, each one pausing at the sight of the small woman standing at the end of the hallway, her hands trembling now, her carefully controlled expression finally beginning to break. Then Danny Cho stepped out of the last cell, 36 years old now instead of the 22 he had been the night they were taken, and when he saw Alex standing there, alive, real, finally in front of him after 14 years of not knowing. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. "Alex," he said, his voice cracking, "you actually came back." "I told you I would," Alex said, her own voice breaking now too, all the calm control she had carried since landing in the courtyard finally slipping away. "I told all of you I would." The hallway filled with quiet sounds, disbelief, relief, the particular kind of crying that comes only after holding something in for far too long. General Orun and Counselor Amarin stood back and watched, along with every soldier in the doorway, as 7 people who had spent 14 years believing they might never see freedom again, finally embraced the one crew member who had refused, through every single one of those years, to ever stop trying to bring them home. It was Marcus Webb, wiping his eyes and steadying himself, who finally looked past Alex, toward the counselor and the general standing at the end of the hallway. "What happens now?" he asked. "After all this?" Counselor Amarin considered the question carefully, looking at the small crowd of reunited humans, at General Orun's still wary expression, at Alex Reyes standing in the center of it all, the same woman who, only hours earlier, had been an unregistered, unidentified object that no weapon in the Dominion's arsenal had been able to stop. "Now," Amarin said slowly, "I believe we owe your people a very long conversation, and an apology that is 14 years overdue." The ruling council chamber had not held an emergency session this large in over a decade. Every seat was filled and extra chairs had been brought in for military officers, archive scholars, and the 8 humans who now sat together near the center of the room, still adjusting to the strange feeling of open space and daylight after so many years shut away. Alex Reyes sat between Marcus Webb and Danny Cho, her flight suit replaced with simple, borrowed clothing, her short hair still rough and uneven. She had barely slept since landing, but she had refused every offer of rest until she understood exactly what would happen next. 14 years of hard-won caution did not disappear just because the fighting had stopped. Counselor Amarin stood at the head of the chamber, waiting for the room to settle before she spoke. "Before this council makes any decisions," she began, "I believe it is important that everyone here understands exactly what happened last night, and why. General Orun, please summarize the military assessment." Orun rose slowly. He looked tired, older than he had the day before, as if the events of the night had aged him. "At full strength, our combined defense network, including the planetary shield, the inner fleet, and facility security, was unable to stop, damage, or even meaningfully slow a single unarmed pilot," he said plainly. "She did not fire a single weapon during the entire engagement. Every action she took was defensive or evasive. Despite this, she broke through every layer of our defense in under 2 hours." A murmur passed through the chamber. Several counselors exchanged uneasy glances. "Chief Archivist Vell," Amarin continued, "please share what you found in the old records." Doran Vell stood, holding a datapad with the ancient file he had uncovered the night before. "There exists a record, over 1,000 years old, describing a single encounter between our ancestors and this species, then referred to only as humans. The record describes a small group of them, stranded and outnumbered during an ancient war that was not their own, who fought for 6 days against forces many times their number, inflicting devastating losses before finally being overwhelmed. The scholars who witnessed it wrote a warning that has sat buried in our archives ever since, mostly forgotten. I believe last night proved that warning was not exaggeration. It was, if anything, understated." "And what did this ancient warning say precisely?" asked one of the older counselors, a stern, gray-feathered official named Terrell Ashkin, who had said little so far but watched the humans in the room with obvious suspicion. Duran read directly from his notes. "Do not corner them. Do not threaten what they love. And whatever you do, do not hold them prisoner and expect them to simply wait." The chamber fell silent. Several counselors looked toward the humans seated near the center of the room, their expressions shifting between fear and something closer to reluctant respect. Terrell Ashkin leaned forward. "Counselor Amarin, I understand the impulse toward mercy after what we witnessed, but I must raise the obvious concern that many in this chamber are surely thinking. If a single one of them, alone and unarmed, can do what we saw last night, what happens if there are more? What happens if this species decides, someday, that the Dominion is a threat rather than simply an obstacle to be gotten around. Alex Reyes stood up before Amarin could respond, her voice steady despite the room full of powerful strangers watching her closely. "May I speak?" she asked. Amarin nodded. "The floor is yours." Alex looked around the chamber, at the rows of Threeny officials who, only hours earlier, had been trying with everything they had to stop her from reaching her crew. "I understand why you're afraid," she said. "I would be too, in your position. But I want to be honest with you, because I think that's the only way any of this works from here. What you saw last night wasn't the full strength of my people. It was one person, alone, with a ship built out of scrap metal over 14 years, doing everything she could to reach 7 friends she refused to give up on. That's not a war fleet. That's not an invasion. That's just what happens when you take something from us and don't give it back." She paused, letting that settle over the room. Humanity isn't looking for an empire. We're not out here trying to conquer star systems or collect prisoners. Most of us just want to explore, to learn, to build lives, the same as I imagine most of your people want. The Meridian wasn't a warship. It was a survey vessel with a crew of scientists and engineers. We came in peace 14 years ago, and your people took us anyway, out of fear of something you didn't understand. I'm not asking you to trust all of humanity today. I'm asking you to consider that maybe the fear that drove that decision 14 years ago is the same fear driving Counselor Ashkin's question right now, and maybe it's time to ask whether that fear has ever actually served either of our peoples well. Torrell Ashkin's feathers bristled slightly, but he did not immediately argue. Several other counselors were nodding slowly, clearly moved by her words. Marcus Webb rose beside her, steadying himself with a hand on the back of his chair. "I was captain of the Meridian," he said. "For 14 years, I sat in a cell, wondering if my government back home even knew we were still alive, wondering if anyone was coming, wondering if this was simply how the rest of my life would be spent. I want you to understand something clearly. Humanity does not forget its own. We do not always come back with a fleet, and we do not always come back with weapons. Sometimes, like last night, we come back with one person, a lot of stubbornness, and nothing left to lose. I would ask this council to consider very carefully whether that is a lesson you want to learn twice." The chamber was quiet for a long moment after that. Counselor Amarin let the silence sit before finally speaking again. "I have served on this council for 11 years, she said. "In that time, I have made many decisions I believed were wise and necessary for the safety of our people. I now believe that the decision made 14 years ago, to imprison a lost, unarmed survey crew, out of fear rather than attempt honest contact, was neither wise nor necessary. It was simply fear, dressed up as caution. And I believe last night showed us, in the clearest way possible, the true cost of that kind of fear." She turned to face the full chamber. "I propose the following. First, that this council issue a formal, recorded apology to the human crew of the Meridian for their unlawful and prolonged detention. Second, that we provide them with a working vessel, supplies, and safe passage to return to their home space, along with all records and technology recovered from their original ship. Third, that we open formal channels of communication with human authorities, wherever their homeworld may be found, with the explicit goal of avoiding any future misunderstanding of this kind. And fourth, that the old warning found in our archives be formally studied and taught, so that no future council makes the same mistake out of ignorance that we made 14 years ago." Counselor Ashkin studied the proposal for a long moment, then looked toward Alex and the other humans seated in the chamber. "And if this human species proves in time to be a genuine threat despite these gestures of goodwill, what then?" "Then we will have made every reasonable effort to avoid that outcome," Amarin said, "which is more than we can currently say about how this began. I would rather risk trusting a people who have shown restraint even while breaking through everything we threw at them than continue a policy of fear that nearly cost us far more than a single damaged shield section last night." The vote was called. It was not unanimous, Torrell Ashkin and a small handful of others abstaining rather than vote in favor, but the proposal passed with a clear majority. A formal apology would be issued. The humans would be given a proper ship, real supplies, and safe passage home. And for the first time in the recorded history of the Dominion, official contact would be attempted with the species, once quietly locked away and forgotten in old, dusty archive files. After the session ended, Alex Reyes stood alone for a while in the quiet hallway outside the council chamber, looking out through a tall window at the capital city stretched below, the same city she had torn through only hours earlier. General Arun found her there, standing a respectful distance away before speaking. "I owe you an apology as well," he said. "Not just for last night, but for how quickly I assumed the worst about you before I understood anything at all." Alex glanced at him. "You were doing your job. You didn't know who I was or what I wanted. I can't blame anyone for being afraid of something they don't understand. I just wish someone had asked, 14 years ago, before deciding what to do with people who never meant any harm. For what it's worth," Arun said, "in 30 years of service, I have never seen anything like what you did last night. I do not say that as a threat, or even entirely as a compliment. I say it because I think it is important that someone in this government remembers it clearly, so that we never make the mistake of underestimating your people again." Alex allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first real one anyone at Ashgrove or the council chamber had seen from her since she landed. "For what it's worth, General, I don't think most humans are looking to prove anything to anyone. I think most of us just want to go home, live our lives, and be left alone unless we choose otherwise. I only did what I did because I made a promise, a long time ago, and I don't like breaking promises. A dangerous quality, in the wrong circumstances," Arun said. "Maybe," Alex agreed, "but I'd rather be dangerous to the people who take what isn't theirs, and safe for everyone else. Seems like a fair trade to me." 3 days later, a repaired and resupplied vessel, far more comfortable than anything Alex had built from scrap metal over 14 lonely years, lifted off from Calyx Prime, carrying 8 humans home at last. Alex sat in the pilot's seat, Marcus Webb beside her as co-pilot, the others settled in behind, quiet, with the strange mixture of relief and disbelief that comes only after the impossible finally happens. Below them, the capital shrank into the distance, the same gray towers and busy sky lanes that had once been the site of the largest defensive mobilization in a century, now calm and ordinary again, beneath a bright morning sky. In the central archive, Doran Vell carefully filed away his notes on the ancient warning, no longer buried and forgotten, but now placed at the very front of the Dominion's records, on first contact and diplomacy, required reading for every young officer and official who would serve the Council in the years to come. He added a short note of his own at the bottom of the file, in careful, steady handwriting. "Unregistered does not mean harmless. Unidentified does not mean without purpose. We nearly learned this lesson through disaster, instead of understanding. Let no future generation make that same mistake, now that we finally know who, and what, was truly approaching the capital that night." In the council chamber, Councillor Amarin stood once more at the great window overlooking the capital, watching the small dot of Alex Reyes's ship disappear into the bright morning sky, carrying 8 people home after 14 long years, and carrying with it the first real hope of understanding between 2 peoples who had, for far too long, known each other only through fear. She thought of the old record Doran Vell had found, the ancient warning about a species that did not fight to win, but simply refused to stop. She thought of the courage it must have taken for one young woman to spend 14 years alone, building ship after ship out of nothing, driven only by a promise she refused to break. And she thought, finally, of how close her people had come to meeting that same courage with nothing but fear and firepower, when all it had ever truly asked for, in the end, was simply to be heard. Word of what happened above Calyx Prime that night spread slowly through the Dominion in the weeks that followed, first as rumor, then as careful official record. Different worlds told the story in different ways. Some focused on the astonishing military failure, some on the strange and ancient warning finally proven true, some simply on the image that stuck with almost everyone who heard it. A single, unarmed woman, flying alone through an entire fleet, not to conquer, not to destroy, but only to bring her family home. The story eventually earned its own name among Dominion citizens, whispered in barracks and taught, eventually, in military academies as a lesson in caution and respect. It was remembered, simply, as the night the sky itself seemed to hold its breath, when something small, and stubborn, and impossible to stop, came alone out of the dark. Unregistered, unidentified, something had been approaching the capital. And then, at last, they had understood. It was human.